Ferrari did not just struggle in Austria. They got trapped by their own car. Because the moment the race became hot, messy, and full of dirty air, Ferrari's pace began to collapse from the inside. The tires overheated. The grip disappeared. The strategy lost power. And Hamilton and Leclerc were no longer attacking Mercedes and Red Bull with freedom. They were managing a Ferrari that was slowly destroying its own race. That is the scary part. A fast car in clean air is not enough. A strong qualifying lap is not enough. If the red car cannot follow closely, cannot protect its tires, and cannot survive thermal degradation when the pressure rises, then every rival now has the same blueprint. Put Ferrari in dirty air. Make them chase. Make them burn the tires. Then wait for the collapse. So the real question is not whether Ferrari can still be quick. The real question is much more dangerous. Did Austria expose the exact weakness that could turn Ferrari's entire season into a fight against itself? Subscribe to the channel. At first, Austria looked like the kind of race Ferrari could still explain away. Not easily, not comfortably, but explain away. Because every team has difficult weekends. Every car has circuits that do not suit it perfectly. Every driver has races where the balance is not ideal, the tires do not behave, and the strategy becomes harder than expected. Ferrari could have tried to put Austria in that category. One tough Sunday, one track that punished the car. One race where Mercedes had more control, Red Bull stayed dangerous, and Ferrari simply did not have enough. But the problem was deeper than that. Because Austria did not just show Ferrari being beaten. It showed Ferrari being exposed. That is a much more serious thing. The Red Bull ring is short, but it is ruthless. It asks the same questions again and again, with almost no time for a car to hide from its own weakness. Can you accelerate cleanly? Can you stay fast on the straights? Can you brake without sliding? Can you follow another car without overheating the tires? Can you keep the race pace alive when the air ahead is no longer clean? Those questions sound technical, but for Hamilton and Leclerc, they become very simple. Can I fight, or do I have to protect? That was the first sign that Austria was turning into something dangerous for Ferrari. Because a front-running driver wants freedom. Freedom to stay close. Freedom to pressure the car ahead. Freedom to attack the braking zone. Freedom to use the tires when the moment matters. Freedom to trust that if he pushes now, the car will not punish him 5 laps later. Ferrari did not give enough of that freedom. And once a car takes freedom away from its drivers, the race changes completely. The driver stops thinking like a hunter. He starts thinking like someone trying to survive the damage. That is what dirty air and thermal degradation can do together. Dirty air is the messy airflow coming from the car ahead. You do not see it clearly from the outside, but the Ferrari feels it immediately. The front loses bite. The car does not turn in with the same confidence. The tires slide more. The rear gets hotter. And every small slide adds more temperature into tires that are already under stress. Then thermal degradation begins. That is when heat starts taking the tire away from the driver. Not because the tire is old in a normal way, but because it has been pushed outside the comfortable range where it can grip properly. And when that happens, the driver is trapped in a brutal loop. The car slides, so the tire gets hotter. The tire gets hotter, so it grips less. It grips less, so the car slides more. And the race pace slowly disappears. That is why Austria was so damaging for Ferrari. Because if dirty air makes the car harder to follow, and thermal degradation makes the tires fade when the driver pushes, then Ferrari has a problem in the exact place where races are won. In battle, a Formula One car does not only need to be fast when it is alone. It has to be fast when chasing, fast when defending, fast when the driver is stuck behind another car and still needs to keep the tires alive. Fast when the air is broken, the track is hot, and the strategy window is closing. That is what Mercedes handled better in Austria. Russell had control. Antonelli reached the podium. Mercedes looked like a team that could operate across the full race with more stability. The car did not look as if it needed perfect conditions to stay alive. Ferrari looked more fragile. And that is where the tension begins. Because Ferrari had reasons to believe before Sunday fully exposed the problem. The team had momentum from Spain. Hamilton's win had created hope. Leclerc was close to the front. The qualifying picture had made the red cars look dangerous. But qualifying can be misleading. In qualifying, the air is clean. The tires only need to survive one push lap. The driver can attack with everything and make the car look sharper than it feels over a race distance. A brilliant lap can hide a fragile race car. A Grand Prix does not allow that for long. A Grand Prix asks the car to repeat the performance. lap after lap, in traffic, under heat, under pressure. And this is where Ferrari's promise started turning into doubt. Because if the car needs clean air to look strong, then starting near the front is not enough. It has to hold position. It has to avoid being dragged into dirty air. It has to protect the tires while still applying pressure. It has to defend without using too much rubber. It has to attack without triggering the same overheating cycle. That is an extremely narrow path. And Austria suggested Ferrari's path was too narrow. Leclerc had already warned that Ferrari was losing too much time on the straights. That matters because straight-line speed is one of the tools a driver uses to escape dirty air. If you have strong straight-line performance, you can attack more directly. You can defend more easily. You can reduce the amount of time spent trapped behind another car. But if you are weak on the straights, you are forced to stay closer through the corners. And staying closer through the corners means more dirty air, more sliding, more tire temperature, more degradation. That is how one weakness feeds the next. The pit wall could try to adjust the plan. The drivers could try to manage the tires. The engineers could watch the data and look for a window. But the problem kept returning because the race conditions kept feeding it. Dirty air made following expensive. Thermal degradation made pushing risky. Straight-line weakness made passing harder. Corner discomfort made recovery harder. And once the tires started fading, every strategic choice became smaller. Stop earlier and you risk traffic. Stay out longer and the tires lose more life. Push on fresher rubber and the temperature can climb again. Manage the tire and the cars ahead disappear. There was no clean answer. That is the kind of race that creates tension inside Ferrari because after the checkered flag, no one can honestly say the issue was only one thing. The drivers will talk about the feel of the car. The engineers will talk about temperatures, balance, and tire behavior. The strategists will talk about windows that close too quickly. The team principal has to turn all of that into one explanation. But the explanation is uncomfortable. Ferrari did not have enough usable race pace. Usable pace is different from peak pace. Peak pace is the fastest version of the car for a short moment. It looks good in qualifying. It creates belief. It gives the fans something to hold on to. Usable pace is the version that stays with the driver when the race becomes ugly, when the air is dirty, when the tires are hot, when the stint is long, when the car ahead refuses to move, when the driver needs to fight without destroying the next part of the race. Austria showed that Ferrari's usable pace was not strong enough, and that is the part Mercedes and Red Bull will study. They will not just ask whether Ferrari was slower. They will ask how Ferrari became slower. Did the red cars lose performance when they followed? Did the tires fade after pushing through dirty air? Did the drivers have to back away to recover temperature? Did the car's straight-line weakness force them to spend more tire life in the corners? Those answers matter because they can become a plan. If Ferrari needs clean air, deny clean air. If Ferrari overheats tires while chasing, make them chase. If Ferrari struggles to pass on the straights, hold them behind for longer. If Ferrari has to work harder in the corners, let the degradation build. That is racing at its most ruthless. Not one dramatic overtake, not one huge crash, not one obvious failure, just a rival placing Ferrari exactly where the car least wants to be and waiting for the performance to fade. That is why Austria was so dangerous for Ferrari's future, because it may have shown that the red car is vulnerable in the most common situation in Formula One, following another car. A car that cannot follow well is always at risk. Even if it qualifies strongly, one poor start can ruin the race. Even if it has pace, traffic can destroy the stint. Even if the driver is faster, dirty air can stop him from staying close long enough to make the move. That weakness changes everything. It changes how aggressive Ferrari can be with strategy. It changes how Hamilton and Leclerc approach overtaking. It changes how rivals defend against them. It changes whether a strong grid position feels like a platform for attack or a fragile advantage that must be protected at all costs. And for Ferrari, that is a nightmare. Because this team cannot build its comeback on fragile advantages. Not with Hamilton, not with Leclerc, not with Mercedes looking composed, not with Red Bull waiting for every mistake, not with a fan base that expects Ferrari to fight like Ferrari, not survive like a midfield team trying to rescue points. The drivers need a car that lets them hunt. Austria gave them a car that made hunting expensive. Hamilton can manage tires better than almost anyone. But if the car overheats them too quickly in dirty air, his race intelligence becomes damage control. Leclerc can produce magic over one lap, But if the race car cannot protect the tires, that magic becomes pressure instead of opportunity. That is the human cost of the technical problem. The driver starts with ambition. Then the car adds conditions. Attack, but do not overheat the tire. Follow, but not too closely. Push, but not for too long. Defend, but do not kill the rear. Recover time, but do not slide. That is not freedom. That is negotiation. And when drivers spend a race negotiating with their own car, rivals feel stronger. Mercedes would have felt that in Austria. Russell's win was not just a win. It was proof that Mercedes could hold a race together while Ferrari was losing its shape. Antonelli's podium added to the message. Mercedes had stability. Ferrari had tension. That is the comparison Ferrari cannot ignore. Because the goal is not only to have a car that looks fast when the stars align. The goal is to have a car that can survive when they do not. A championship-level car has to work in clean air and dirty air. It has to protect tires when leading and when chasing. It has to stay balanced when the driver needs to attack and when he needs to defend. Ferrari did not prove that in Austria. And now every future race carries a shadow from this one. If the track is hot, people will remember Austria. If Ferrari gets stuck behind another car, people will remember Austria. If the tires start fading early, people will remember Austria. If the strategy becomes reactive, people will remember Austria. That is how one disaster becomes a storyline. And Ferrari knows how dangerous storylines can become. Because once the paddock believes a weakness exists, it will keep testing it until Ferrari proves otherwise. Not with words, not with optimism, not with promises about updates. On track, Hamilton and Leclerc need to show they can follow closely without the tires falling apart. Ferrari needs to show it can keep temperatures under control when the air is disturbed. The pit wall needs to show it can choose strategy from strength, not fear. The car needs to show that the Austrian collapse was not a pattern. That is the next battle. And it may be harder than finding a few tenths of lap time. Because Ferrari is not only chasing speed. Ferrari is chasing stability. A wider window. A car that does not punish its drivers for racing hard.